Welcome to Group Charlie's Happiness Project presentation. To start, we have a fundamental assumption, and that is the majority within a society will tend to control power and look out for their own self-interests. Now, even though there are some outliers, such as South Africa, over time, the majority will institutionalize their power, and because they are looking for their own self-interest, often not look out for the interests of minorities. Therefore, it's important for us as political scientists to look at how we can protect minorities throughout the world. Due to that, our proxy for justice is going to be the Discrimination and Violence Against Minorities Index. Our hypothesis is going to be that if a country is corrupt and ethnically diverse, it will tend to oppress minorities. Religious diversity, however, does not play a significant role in whether or not minorities will be oppressed. We have 4 scatter plots which demonstrate our hypothesis. The first is the corruption index scaled against the discrimination and violence against minorities index. Now, as you can see, the R-squared measure indicates that there is a high correlation, or at least a fairly strong one when compared to ethnic and religious diversity, between corruption and whether or not minorities will be oppressed within a society. The second scatter plot is ethnic diversity plotted against the discrimination and violence against minorities index. Now, as you can see by the R-squared measure, while there is still some correlation, it's nearly 3 times less that of the corruption versus discrimination and violence index, which leads to our further conclusion that even though ethnic diversity does matter in the oppression of minorities, it is not as weighty a factor as corruption. The third scatter plot is the religious diversity index and the discrimination and violence against minorities index. Now, as you can see by the R-squared measure, there's almost no correlation between religious diversity and discrimination against minorities. Therefore, we conclude that this is not in any way a good measure and does not show any causation of religious diversity making minorities more oppressed. And lastly, we have the press freedom index plotted against the discrimination against minorities index. Now, we did this to see if maybe with a free press, minorities would be less oppressed. We thought that maybe with a free press they would be able to air their grievances and people could see abuses within the system. However, as you can see by the R-squared measure, there's no correlation between a free press and a less oppressed minorities. Now, what does this prove? We believe it proves that the corruption indicator shows that it's the institutionalized power which majorities have, which causes minorities to be oppressed, and not merely a lack of knowledge or information. Turning to our maps now, this is the corruption map of the world. Now, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the darker the blue, the more corrupt that country is. And there are 5 shades of blue, each of them split into a different quintile. So the lightest blue are the least corrupt countries, and the darkest blue are the most corrupt countries. This is our ethnic diversity map. It follows the same logic, with each color corresponding to a different quintile. So the 0 through 20% quintile are the least ethnically diverse nations, while the 81 through 100% quintile are the most ethnically diverse nations. And this is our religious diversity map, and the same logic applies here, with blue being the least religiously diverse and gray being the most religiously diverse nations. In conclusion, our findings show that religious diversity does not cause the oppression of minorities. Ethnic diversity plays a small but clear role in the oppression of minorities, and corruption plays the biggest factor in the oppression of minorities within a society. Also, our findings with the Press Freedom Index show that it is not a lack of airing of grievances or showing of abuses which causes the oppression of minorities, but rather it is the corrupt, institutionalized power that the majority takes advantage of.